Admiral Daejung stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Indomitable. His eyes were fixed on the holographic display in front of him. The display showed dying signals from the human fleet. 300 ships, all gone. They had been destroyed in just 20 minutes, he whispered to himself with anger. His jaw was so tight it hurt. All because the Vralthi had waited and done nothing. Lieutenant Hyun turned from her station. Her face was pale and scared. She spoke in a shaky voice. The Vralthi command ship was calling them. Ambassador Krell wanted to talk. Daejung told her to put him on the screen. His voice was cold and hard. The face of Ambassador Krell appeared before him. Krell was an insectoid alien. His mandibles clicked together. Humans had learned that this clicking meant fake sympathy. Krell started to say he was sorry about what happened, but Daejung cut him off. His words were sharp like knives. He told Krell that the Vralthi had watched humans die. For 47 minutes, the Vralthi ships had sat at the edge of the Karos expanse. They had watched while the enemy Threx fleet tore the human ships apart. The Vralthi weapons were ready. Their shields were up. But they just watched and did nothing, Krell tried to explain. He said the strategic calculations suggested that helping would be dangerous. Captain Minseo shouted from the tactical station. Her voice was full of anger. She reminded Krell that they had an alliance. They had a treaty signed in blood. Human blood. The humans had saved the Vralthi colony worlds from the Scourge years ago, and this was how the Vralthi repaid them. Krell's antennae drooped down. He said the Threx were too powerful. He said humanity's expansion in space had threatened the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. Daejung finished Krell's sentence for him. So the Vralthi let the Threx slaughter humans. He asked Krell a question. What did the Threx promise the Vralthi? What was worth the lives of 300,000 humans? The transmission suddenly cut out. The screen went dark. Daejung turned to face his bridge crew. He looked at their faces. They were young faces, tired faces. These were people who had watched their friends die, their families die, all because their so-called allies had chosen politics over honor. He spoke quietly but firmly. He told them to get him Earth Command. It was time for humanity to remember what they do to those who betray them. Commander Jiwoo looked up from the communications console. There was an incoming message from the surviving fleet commanders. They were waiting for orders from Daejung. Daejung straightened his uniform. The Indomitable had survived because it had been on a reconnaissance mission, far from the main battle. It was not because the Vralthi had shown any mercy, but the ship had survived. And survival meant opportunity, a chance to fight back. He gave his orders. All ships should return to human space. They should avoid all Vralthi territory. Engineering should prepare the slipstream drives for a long journey. He paused and a cold smile crossed his face. They were going to pay their old friends a visit. A visit the Vralthi would never forget. The crew began working immediately. They set courses for home. They sent messages to other human ships. The mood on the bridge was grim but determined. Hyun pulled up data on her screen. She showed Daejung the numbers. 300,000 dead. 78 ships had managed to escape. The rest were gone. Families would never see their loved ones again. Children would grow up without parents. Parents would bury their children. Minseo came to stand beside the Admiral. She spoke softly. She asked if they were really going to do this. If they were going to go after the Vralthi, Daejung nodded. The Vralthi had made a choice at Karos. They had chosen to let humans die. Now humanity would make a choice too, and the Vralthi would learn what it meant to betray the human race. Jiwoo reported that all surviving ships had received the orders. They were jumping to slipstream and heading home. The journey would take several weeks, but they would make it. They would survive. Daejung looked out at the stars through the view screen. Somewhere out there, the Vralthi were congratulating themselves. They thought they had made a smart political move. They thought they had avoided a fight with the Threx by sacrificing their human allies, but they were wrong. They had not avoided a fight. They had started one. A fight with humanity. And humanity did not forget. Humanity did not forgive. Humanity remembered every betrayal, every broken promise, every life lost. The Admiral thought about all the things the Vralthi depended on. Human-built mining stations, human-designed power grids, human technology in almost every part of their civilization. The Vralthi had relied on human generosity for 30 years. They had taken and never truly given anything back. Now it was time to collect the debt. Time to take back what was owed. Time to show the galaxy that humans were not victims. They were survivors. They were fighters. And they would have their revenge. Hayun interrupted his thoughts. She had finished calculating the resources in Vralthi space that humans had built or provided. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of installations, thousands of pieces of technology, billions of credits worth of infrastructure. All of it would soon belong to humanity again. All of it would be taken back. And the Vralthi would pay for their betrayal. They would pay in ways they could not yet imagine. The Indomitable's engines hummed as the ship prepared to jump into slipstream. Daejung gave the final order. Take them home. The crew acknowledged, and the ship vanished into the faster-than-light tunnel that would carry them back to Earth. Behind them, the Karos expanse was silent. 300 ships floated as debris. 300,000 bodies drifted in the cold of space. They would never be recovered, never be brought home, never be properly buried, but they would be remembered, and they would be avenged. Humanity would make sure of that. The Vralthi thought they had seen the last of the human fleet. They were wrong. The human fleet would return, and when it did, everything would change. 6 months had passed since the betrayal at Karos. Now the Earth Parliament was meeting. The chamber was completely full, not just with representatives from Earth and the colonies. Military officers were there too, corporate executives, colony governors. All of them had come because the Vralthi treachery had left their worlds vulnerable and angry. Prime Minister Sung Min walked to the podium. Her hair had turned completely white in the months since Karos, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. She looked strong despite the grief she carried. She began to speak. Her voice echoed through the silent chamber. 300,000 souls lost. 300,000 mothers and fathers and sons and daughters. They had not died in honest battle. They had died through calculated betrayal. She pressed a button on the podium. Holographic displays appeared all around the room. They showed Vralthi trade routes through space, military installations on their worlds, economic networks that connected their civilization. Every display showed how much the Vralthi depended on humanity. Sungmin continued speaking. For 30 years, the Vralthi Concord had relied on humanity. Humans protected their mining operations from pirates. Humans secured their trade lanes. Humans shared advanced technology. Her fist slammed down on the podium. That was over now. No more. Senator Bora stood up from her seat. She asked if the Prime Minister was suggesting they go to war with the Vralthi. The Vralthi fleet was twice as large as the human fleet. How could they fight? Sungmin laughed. But it was a bitter laugh without humor. No, she was not suggesting war. She was suggesting they take back what belonged to them. Every mining station humans had built in Vralthi territory. Every trading post humans had established. Every piece of technology humans had shared. Every credit the Vralthi owed. Admiral Daejung rose from his seat in the military section. He spoke clearly so everyone could hear. The Vralthi fleet was spread thin across 17 colony worlds. Most of their defensive infrastructure had been built by human engineers. Their power grids used human fusion reactors. Their orbital defenses used human-designed weapon platforms. The Vralthi military looked strong, but it depended on human technology. Counselor Yu Jin from New Seoul spoke next. She pointed out that the Vralthi economy depended on the Kepler trade route. That route passed through 3 human-controlled star systems. Humans could shut it down whenever they wanted. Sungmin nodded in agreement. The Vralthi did not need to be destroyed. They needed to be taught a lesson. Starting immediately, every Vralthi asset in human space would be frozen. Every human working for Vralthi corporations would come home. And every installation humans had built in Vralthi territory had secret kill switches that the Vralthi did not know about. Humans could turn them all off remotely. The chamber erupted with discussion. Everyone started talking at once. Some were excited. Some were worried. Some were angry and wanted immediate action. General Jae-hwan raised his voice above the noise. The 3rd and 7th fleets could be mobilized within 1 week. Combined with the stealth frigates, they could seize the major Vralthi trade hubs before the Vralthi even knew what was happening. Bora pressed the issue. What would the Vralthi response be? How would they fight back? Daejung stood again. The Vralthi would not have a good response. Not fast enough anyway. While the Vralthi had been watching humans die at Karos, the Human Intelligence Division had been working. They knew where every Vralthi admiral slept at night. They knew which shipyards were really operational and which were just for show. They knew Vralthi response times, their protocols, their weaknesses. Humans had learned from the best teachers. The Vralthi themselves had taught humanity that survival mattered more than honor. The vote was called. Every single representative voted yes. Operation Reclamation would begin at dawn. After the vote, small groups gathered to discuss the details. Military officers planned the fleet movements. Corporate executives calculated the value of assets to be seized. Colony governors prepared their security forces. Sungmin stood by the window looking out at Earth. Yujin came to stand beside her. Yujin asked if they were doing the right thing. If this was what humanity should be. The Prime Minister did not answer immediately. She thought carefully about the question. Finally she spoke. Humanity had tried being nice. Humanity had tried being generous. Humanity had tried being the good friends and allies. And what had happened? 300,000 humans had died while their allies watched. The galaxy understood one thing: power, results, consequences. The Vralthi would learn that betraying humanity had consequences. Every other species would learn the same lesson. Humanity would never again be the victim. Yujin nodded slowly. She understood. The old humanity had died at Karos along with those 300,000 people. A new humanity was being born, one that was harder, stronger, one that did not rely on the goodwill of others. Across Earth and the colonies, preparations began. Ships were loaded with Marines. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Engineers studied the schematics of every installation in Vralthi space that humans had built. They made sure the kill switches would work. They made sure they could take control remotely if needed. Intelligence officers reviewed their data. They had spent years gathering information on the Vralthi. Information about their military, their economy, their politics. All of that information would now be used against them. In orbit, the fleet gathered. Warships and transports, stealth frigates and heavy cruisers. The Indomitable took her place at the center of the formation. Admiral Daejong looked at the assembled fleet with satisfaction. It was not as large as the fleet that had died at Karos, but it would be enough. The countdown began. 24 hours until Operation Reclamation started. 24 hours until humanity struck back. 24 hours until the Vralthi learned that betrayal had a price. Sungmin addressed the fleet by video link. She spoke to every ship, every Marine, every officer. She reminded them why they were doing this. For the fallen, for the future, to make sure humanity was never betrayed again. The response from the fleet was immediate and unified. They were ready. They would not fail. They would take back what was owed. And they would make the Vralthi pay. As the final hours ticked away, an eerie calm settled over the fleet. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone was prepared. This was not a war of conquest. This was not about destroying the Vralthi. This was about justice. This was about collecting a debt. This was about teaching the galaxy that humanity could not be used and discarded. Dawn came to Earth. The fleet jumped into slipstream. Operation Reclamation had begun. There was no going back now. Humanity had made its choice, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Vralthi mining colony of Helios 4 never saw the attack coming. They had no warning at all. At 4 in the morning local time, Commander Su-jin and her strike team appeared in the station control center. They had traveled through slipspace and emerged with perfect precision. The Vralthi security chief barely had time to reach for his communicator. Suddenly he was looking down the barrel of a human plasma rifle. Su-jin spoke in perfect Vralthi language. Her voice was pleasant and calm. She told the security chief that the station was now under human control. He had two choices: cooperate with the humans, or watch as they remotely shut down the life support systems that kept everyone alive. The security chief's mandibles clicked in confusion and fear. He said this was impossible. This was sovereign Vralthi territory. Humans could not just take it. Su-jin told him to check his records. The station had been built by Titan Industries, a human corporation. 70% of all the components were manufactured by humans. The fusion cores that powered everything? Human-made. The mining equipment? Human-made. Even the air they were breathing had been processed by human atmospheric converters. The humans were not invading. They were repossessing their own property. The same scene was happening at 70 different installations across Vralthi space. Captain Taeyang and his Marines walked into the Vralthi military shipyard at Kepler Station. They quietly informed the workers that their paychecks would now come from Earth instead of the Vralthi government. Most of the workers were actually relieved. Earth paid better. Engineer Hye Jin and her team seized control of the massive communication relay that connected the Vralthi northern colonies. It was a relay that humanity had built and maintained for 15 years. The Vralthi had paid almost nothing for it. Now it belonged to Earth again. By noon Earth Standard Time, the Vralthi Concord had lost 1/3 of its industrial capacity, and they still did not fully understand what was happening. Ambassador Krell's hologram appeared in the war room of the Indomitable. His usually calm demeanor was completely shattered. He looked panicked and angry. He shouted that this was an act of war. The humans were violating every treaty and law. Admiral Daejung sat calmly in his chair. He told Krell they were not at war. They were collecting debts. Debts the Vralthi had accumulated when they let 300,000 humans die. Debts for 30 years of protection. Debts for the technology that had made Vralthi civilization possible. Krell shouted that this was theft. Pure and simple theft. Daejung leaned forward. His voice was very calm but very cold. He told Krell that theft was what happened at Karos. This was just business. Every installation the humans had seized, they had built. Every system they had taken control of, they had designed. They were just taking back their own property. Lieutenant Hyun brought up a holographic display. It showed a detailed financial ledger. She explained the calculations. The Vralthi Concord owed humanity approximately 4 trillion credits. This included outstanding debts, technology transfers, and military support over 30 years. The assets humans had just seized were valued at about 2 trillion credits. The Vralthi still owed 2 trillion more. Krell's antennae trembled with fear. He said the Concord's economy would collapse if this continued. Captain Min-seo spoke coldly. She said the Vralthi should have thought of that before they betrayed humanity. Then she explained what would happen next. The Vralthi had 72 hours to agree to human terms. Every human-built station in Vralthi territory would transfer to Earth control. Every credit owed would be paid with interest. And the Vralthi would sign a treaty guaranteeing humanity had priority access to all Vralthi resources for the next 50 years. Krell asked what would happen if the Vralthi refused these terms. Daejung smiled. But there was no warmth in that smile, only cold determination. If the Vralthi refused, humans would activate the kill switches in every piece of human technology in Vralthi space. Their power grids would go dark. Their ships would stop flying. Their colonies would start running out of air. And humans would sit back and watch the Vralthi beg the Threx for help. Just like the Vralthi had watched humans die, the transmission ended abruptly. Krell disappeared from the screen. Commander Jiwoo looked troubled. She asked the Admiral what would happen if the Vralthi called their bluff. What if the Vralthi thought the humans were lying about the kill switches? Daejung spoke quietly. It was not a bluff. Every word was true. The humans really could shut down Vralthi civilization with the push of a button. The only question was whether the Vralthi were willing to gamble their entire species on it. Reports came in from all 70 installations. Everyone had been successfully seized. There had been almost no resistance. Most Vralthi workers had simply surrendered when they realized how thorough the human planning had been. Min-seo reviewed the reports. She noted that 3 installations had tried to resist. Those 3 had been shut down remotely. Their power had been cut. Their life support had been turned off just long enough to make the point. Then it had been turned back on. The workers at those 3 stations had immediately surrendered after that. The human fleet maintained position around the seized installations. They were ready for a Vralthi military response. But no response came. The Vralthi fleet stayed in their home systems. They were confused and disorganized. They had no plan for the situation. Hours passed. Then a full day. The Vralthi government was silent. They were probably arguing among themselves about what to do. Some would want to fight. Some would want to negotiate. Some would want to surrender immediately. Daejung knew the Vralthi leadership was in chaos. They had never expected humanity to strike back like this. They had thought humans were weak and forgiving. They had thought humans would eventually accept what happened at Karos and move on. They had been very, very wrong. On the second day, communication came from the Vralthi capital world. Not from Krell, from someone higher in the government. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted to discuss terms. Dae-jung smiled. The Vralthi were breaking. They would accept the human terms. They had no choice. Their entire civilization was now in human hands. The kill switches were real. The threat was real. And the Vralthi knew it. He sent back a simple message. The terms were not negotiable. Accept them or face the consequences. The Vralthi had 60 hours remaining. The waiting continued. But Dae-jung was confident. The Vralthi would surrender. They would pay their debts. And humanity would finally have justice for the 300,000 dead. The Vralthi Concord gave up first. They could not hold out any longer. 60 hours after the ultimatum, a Vralthi diplomatic vessel arrived at Earth. It was not just Ambassador Krell this time. The High Chancellor himself had come. He was their head of state, their highest leader. His presence showed how desperate the situation had become for the Vralthi. Prime Minister Sung-min met them in Parliament's central chamber. She had chosen this room deliberately. This was the same room where the Human-Vralthi Alliance had been signed 30 years ago. This was where both species had sworn to defend each other against all threats. The old treaty document still hung on the wall. But now it was enclosed in shattered glass. The glass had been broken on the same day humanity learned what Vralthi honor really meant. Nothing. High Chancellor Vrel entered the room walking like someone going to a funeral. His carapace had lost its shine. His antennae drooped down in defeat. Behind him, Ambassador Krell looked equally beaten down. Vrel spoke first. His translator made his words sound hollow and empty. He said the conquered accepted the human terms. They would agree to everything. Sung-min gestured to the chairs. She told them to sit. They would discuss all the details now. What followed was not a negotiation. Both sides knew that. It was a reckoning, a settling of accounts. The Vralthi had no power to negotiate anything. Senator Bora presented the accounting in detail. 137 mining installations now belong to humans. 42 trading posts, 23 military support stations. The total value was 2.1 trillion credits. The remaining debt of 1.9 trillion would be paid in raw materials over the next 10 years. Metals, crystals, rare elements, all of it would flow to Earth. Counselor Yujin continued with the trade terms. All Vralthi trade through human-controlled star systems would now pay a 40% tariff. That was almost half of every shipment's value. All technology-sharing agreements were cancelled. The Vralthi could purchase human technology at market rates like everyone else, but humans were done giving it away for free. Admiral Dae-jung stood to present the military terms. The Vralthi fleet would reduce its size by 30% immediately. All remaining vessels would carry human observers who would report directly to Earth. And if humanity ever called for military assistance, the Vralthi had exactly 12 hours to respond. Not 47 minutes of debate and calculation. 12 hours or face severe penalties. Vrel's mandibles clicked in distress. He said these terms would cripple the Vralthi economy. It would take generations to recover. Sung-min's response was flat and cold. Good. The Vralthi economy had been built on human labor, human technology, and human blood. Now they would pay the real cost. The alternative was watching their colonies suffocate when humans turned off all the machines keeping them alive. Krell looked up with pleading in his eyes. He said it would take generations for the Vralthi to recover from this. Captain Minseo's voice cut through the room like a knife. Generations? It would take humanity generations to replace the 300,000 people the Vralthi had let die. Every family that lost someone at Karos would remember the betrayal for the rest of their lives. The Vralthi were getting off easy. Vrel slumped in his chair. He looked defeated and broken. He said what the humans were describing was indentured servitude. The Vralthi would be little better than slaves. Sung-min leaned forward. Her voice was hard as steel. She told Vrel this was not indentured servitude. Indentured servitude implied the Vralthi had no choice in what happened. But the Vralthi had made a choice at Karos. They had chosen to let humans die rather than risk their own ships. They had chosen political convenience over allied lives. These were not terms of servitude. These were the price of treachery. She stood and walked to the broken treaty display on the wall. She touched the shattered glass. For 30 years, humanity had believed they had true friends among the stars. They had learned at Karos that they only had customers. Customers who would drop humanity the moment it became inconvenient. Well, customers paid their debts. The Vralthi could sign the agreement or explain to their people why their worlds were going dark. Vrel looked at the document before him. It was displayed on a tablet screen. His hand shook as he reached out. Slowly, he pressed his seal to the digital signature pad. The treaty was binding now. Legal and official, the treaty was done. The Vralthi had surrendered completely. As the Vralthi delegation prepared to leave, General Jae Hwan approached Sung-min quietly. He told her the other species in the galaxy were watching closely. The Nix Federation had sent a message requesting clarification on human intentions. They wanted to know if humans would come after them next. Sung-min smiled grimly. She said that was good. Let them watch. Let them learn. Humanity was done being the galaxy's useful idiot, the species that everyone used but nobody respected. From now on, everyone would pay their debts to humanity, every single one. After the Vralthi left, the human leadership gathered to discuss what came next. The treaty was signed, but enforcement would be crucial. The Vralthi might try to cheat or delay payments. They might try to hide assets or undervalue what they owed. Dae-jung assured everyone that human observers would be everywhere in Vralthi space. Every shipyard, every trading post, every military base would have human oversight. The Vralthi would not be able to hide anything. Bora asked about the other species. Would humanity go after them too? Many other species owed humanity debts. Would there be more operations like this one? Sung-min considered the question carefully. She said humanity would evaluate each case individually. Some species had been genuinely unable to help at Karos. They were too far away or too weak. Those species would be dealt with fairly. But any species that had chosen not to help, that had abandoned humanity deliberately, they would face consequences. Yujin pointed out that this would change humanity's place in the galaxy. Other species would fear humans now. Some might even hate them. Was humanity prepared for that? Sung-min nodded. She was prepared. Fear was better than pity. Respect was better than friendship if that friendship could be abandoned so easily. Humanity would rather be feared and respected than liked and betrayed. The meeting continued late into the night. Plans were made for the future. The human fleet would remain on high alert. The economy would need to absorb all the new assets taken from the Vralthi. Workers would need to be trained to operate the seized installations. But the foundation had been laid. Humanity had struck back. The Vralthi had been made to pay, and every other species in the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Betraying humanity had consequences. Serious consequences. Consequences that could destroy entire civilizations. As Sung-min finally left the parliament building that night, she looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vralthi were beginning their long servitude to humanity. Somewhere out there, other species were reconsidering how they treated humans. And somewhere out there, 300,000 humans who had died at Karos could finally rest. Their deaths had been avenged. Their sacrifice had not been forgotten. Humanity had made sure of that. 1 year had passed since the Karos betrayal. The galaxy was completely different now. The Vralthi Concord still existed, but barely. They operated under what galactic media called human supervision. Their economy had stabilized somewhat, but every credit they earned went toward paying their debts to humanity. The proud insectoid species that had once looked down on primitive humans now worked for corporations based on Earth. It was a complete reversal of power, but the real change was in how other species viewed humanity. Ambassador. He-One stood before the Galactic Council. This was the same council that had offered thoughts and prayers after Karos. The same council that had done nothing to help humanity in its darkest hour. Now they hung on her every word. Now they treated humans with careful respect mixed with fear. She reported on recent developments. The Nix Federation had requested human assistance in upgrading their defense grid. They were willing to pay premium rates. The Zeln Collective wanted to negotiate a mutual defense pact with binding terms. The Irani kingdoms were offering preferential trade deals if humans would establish security patrols along their borders. She paused to let the implications sink in. For 30 years, humanity had been everyone's convenient ally. Humans protected shipping lanes nobody else wanted to patrol. Humans shared technology they had spent centuries developing. Humans bled and died for colonies that were not even human. And when humans needed help, she gestured to the empty Vralthi seats. They learned that friendship meant nothing to species who calculated everything in terms of advantage. The Nyx representative spoke up. Voss was a crystalline being who shimmered when he moved. He said the Federation deeply regretted not helping at Kairos. They wished they could change what had happened. Haywan's laugh was sharp and bitter. Regrets the Federation had ships within 6 hours of Kairos. They could have helped. They chose not to. Just like everyone else in this chamber. She swept her gaze across all the assembled species. She told them clearly about the new reality. Humanity was done being their charity case. Done being the species everyone called when they needed help, but ignored when humans were bleeding. She tapped her datapad. Holographic displays filled the chamber showing new terms for human cooperation. Want human military support? Sign a binding mutual defense treaty with automatic response requirements. No more debates. No more calculations. When humans call, you respond or face penalties. Want human technology? Pay market rates plus licensing fees. Want access to human trade routes? Pay the toll. Every time. No exceptions. Back on Earth, Admiral Dae-jung walked through the memorial to the Kairos fallen. 300,000 names were etched into black stone. The names were arranged in the shape of the fleet formation that had died that terrible day. It was a haunting memorial that drew millions of visitors every year. Commander Hyun joined him at the memorial. She had been promoted for her role in Operation Reclamation. She reported that intelligence showed the Threx Empire had pulled back from human borders. The Threx were not interested in testing humanity's resolve. They had seen what happened to the Vralthi and wanted no part of it. Dae-jung nodded slowly as he looked at the names on the wall. He spoke quietly. The Threx had learned the same lesson as the Vralthi. Humanity might be smaller than the great empires. Humans might not have the biggest fleets or the oldest civilizations, but humans remembered everything. And humans always collected their debts, always. Captain Mincio approached them. Her uniform now bore the insignia of the Human Enforcement Fleet. This was a new military division created specifically to ensure nobody ever betrayed humanity again. The Enforcement Fleet had broad powers and answered directly to Earth Command. She reported that the first payment from the Vralthi had arrived. 100 billion credits worth of refined metals and rare elements. The shipment was on schedule and had been verified. The Vralthi were keeping their word so far. Dae-jung asked about the observer program. How were the human officers embedded with Vralthi fleet commands doing? Mincio said 47 human officers were now serving as observers. They reported that cooperation from the Vralthi had been reluctant at first but was now thorough. The Vralthi were learning an important lesson. Honoring agreements was much easier than facing the consequences of breaking them. Dae-jung touched one of the names on the memorial wall. Lieutenant Park had served under him before Kairos. He had been a good officer and a good person. Now he was just a name on a wall. One of 300,000 names. 300,000 reasons why humanity would never be victims again. In the Parliament building, Prime Minister Sung Min addressed a gathering of colony governors and corporate leaders. Her hair was still white from the stress of the past year. But the exhaustion had left her eyes. Now there was something harder in her gaze, something that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and revenge. She addressed the question she had heard most often over the past year. Many people asked if humanity had gone too far, if they had become bullies and aggressors, if they had lost their humanity in their quest for justice. She paused to let the murmurs settle. Then she gave her answer. Humanity had not started a war of conquest. Humans had not bombed civilian populations. They had not committed genocide or enslaved entire species. They had simply stopped being the galaxy's doormat. They had stopped giving away their labor, their technology, and their lives for free. Senator Bora stood to speak. She said some people believed the terms imposed on the Vralthi were too harsh. That humanity was being cruel. Sungmin's voice became hard as steel. Too harsh? She would tell them what was harsh. Harsh was watching your son's ship disappear from the tactical display, while your allies sat at the edge of sensor range debating whether helping you was strategically smart. Harsh was explaining to a 6-year-old girl why her mother was never coming home from the Kairos expanse. Harsh was 300,000 funerals. She looked across the assembly with fierce eyes. Humanity had not seized Vralthi territory. They had repossessed their own property. They had not destroyed the Vralthi economy. They had sent them a bill for services rendered over 30 years. And yes, humanity was making them pay every last credit they owed. That was not cruelty. That was capitalism. That was justice. That was humanity. The room erupted in applause. The sound echoed through the chamber for a full minute. Later that night, Sungmin stood on her balcony overlooking the glittering skyline of New Seoul. Counselor Yoo-jin joined her carrying 2 glasses of soju, the traditional Korean alcohol. They raised their glasses together. To the fallen, Yoo-jin said quietly. To the fallen, Sungmin echoed. They drank in respectful silence. Yoo-jin asked a thoughtful question. Had humanity changed as a species? The humans who signed the first Vralthi Treaty had been idealists. They had believed in friendship between species and shared prosperity. What were humans now? Sungmin thought carefully before answering. Humanity had not changed fundamentally. Humans had adapted to reality. Those idealists had built an alliance based on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. The Vralthi had shown that only one side was making real sacrifices. So humanity adapted. They learned, and they made sure it would never happen again. Yoo-jin noted that other species feared humanity now. Was that really what humans wanted? Sungmin said yes. Fear bred respect, respect bred caution, and caution kept people alive. For 30 years, humanity had been the galaxy's helpful neighbor. They smiled and shared and protected everyone. And when the shooting started at Karos, humans died alone. Never again. She looked out at the city lights. Millions of lights representing millions of lives. Lives that would never again be thrown away because someone calculated that human blood was worth less than political convenience. Humanity was not the galaxy's victim anymore. Not their charity case. Not their convenient ally. Not their expendable friend. Humans were now a force to be respected and feared, and humanity would always collect what it was owed. In orbit above Earth, the Indomitable hung in space. Her hull still showed scars from Karos, but she had been rebuilt, reinforced, and expanded. She was no longer just a warship. She had become a symbol of humanity's transformation. Admiral Dae-jung stood on her bridge watching a Vralthi convoy deliver their monthly debt payment. The human enforcement fleet ships surrounded the convoy carefully. Their weapons were ready but not aimed. The message was clear. Follow the rules and there would be no problems. Commander Ha-yoon approached with a message from command. They were asking if Dae-jung was ready for the next phase of expansion. Dae-jung smiled. The Vralthi were not the only species that owed humanity debts. The Zeln Collective had borrowed human military advisors 15 years ago and never properly compensated Earth. The Irani kingdoms had used human merchant marine to build their entire trade empire. And the Threks, his smile hardened. The Threks owed humanity 300,000 lives. That was a debt that would take a very long time to collect. But it would be collected. He turned to face his crew. Young faces that had aged years in the months since Karos. Faces that had learned the hardest lesson the galaxy had to teach. In the cold mathematics of interstellar politics, only power mattered. Only results mattered. Only consequences mattered. Dae-jung spoke clearly so everyone could hear. They had been betrayed in war.